Bose, daughter of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's FAF, called on government to take steps to bring back his mortal remains, which she claimed have been kept at a temporary home in Renkoji Temple in Tokyo, Japan. She said, "We must accept that Netaji had died following an airplane crash on takeoff in Taipei, Taiwan." She pointed out that for decades, most of the Indian governments hesitated or refused to bring back Netaji's mortal remains, even though the priest of Renkoji Temple and the Japanese government were ready and eager to let his remains return to his motherland. Joining us at this point of time is Ms. Anita Bose, daughter of Indian nationalist Subhash Chandra Bose. Ma'am, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX. I'm going to start off by asking you, what appeals have you made to the government, and why do you think now is the time to bring back Netaji's ashes to India?
At this stage, I have not made another appeal. I had made previous appeals to the government and had not received any response, but I felt that at this stage it was more important to sort of appeal to the public and get support and sympathy for this undertaking. And the second question, why do I feel it is necessary that my father's remains are returned to India? Well, I think he had a single-mindedness of purpose, I would say, and that was to commit himself to the struggle for independence. And I think he really was willing to sacrifice everything for that. To begin with, I mean, he sacrificed a career. After all, he passed the ICS exam and would have had an attractive and well-paying and high-status job if he had chosen to stay in the Indian civil service, but he resigned because he felt he could not serve two masters, that is the Raj and his motherland at the same time. And he never decided that he could really commit himself to having a private life, but his main concern was working for India's independence. And ultimately he also died for India's independence, and I think it would have been his greatest wish to see India free, even though I think the form India became free, that is with a partitioned India, would not have pleased him at all. But it was very important for him to see his country free nonetheless. And I think since he did not live to see his country become independent, at least he should have the privilege of being returned from exile after all these years.
All right. Do you feel that you have been given closure on Netaji's death, that it was indeed an air crash in 1945 that led to his demise?
Definitely, I think we have all the evidence now available. Of course, in the 50s or so we did not, because many of the documents concerned with the issue were still classified. But I think everything has been declassified by now. And so we have, alone on this issue, we have 10 reports which came to ultimately the same conclusion. And one report which did not, has so many mistakes that you can forget it.
Right, absolutely. Now, what have the previous governments told you about the ashes of Netaji being in Japan?
The previous government hasn't told me anything new. In fact, I think since Narasimha Rao's government, all the governments since sort of have been surprisingly quiet on the issue and not taking any steps in that direction. So I must say it would be good to pick up on the old issue, which unfortunately at the time could not be realized because before it could the ashes could be returned in the 1990s, the government fell and the new government set up another inquiry commission. And while this commission was working, and it continued to work for about 6 years and probably would have worked longer if the then government had not said, well, that was long enough, submit your report. And during the commission's work, it was not possible to do anything. And after that, when that report was rejected by the government, or rather not accepted, and no government took any active interest in having the remains returned to India.
Right, absolutely. Now, why do you think the government has been reluctant in bringing back Netaji's ashes?
You see, a politician has to be concerned with, particularly in a democracy, with the electorate. That is, what do people want? And if there is an issue which, on top of everything else, is not a very urgent one, which has to be resolved immediately, you would not sort of enter into something which is bound to land you as a politician in a controversy. And for a long time, there were a number of people who had their doubts about my father's death in 1945. And many of them, of course, just sort of had their doubts and said he could have been, might have been, and so on. There are many who certainly did not study the issue very carefully, and if they had, they certainly would have found out that he did in fact die at the time. And so a government had nothing to gain by starting a controversial issue. And unless a politician has something to gain, why would he or she do it?
Trump has signed orders to make public the JFK assassination files and the Martin Luther King files too. Do you think India should make Bose and Shastriji's files public?
I think the first Modi government declassified the government's files at the time, and the Chief Minister of West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee, declassified the Bengali files at that time. And a whole bunch of files, they are available online if one wants to study them. And when they were declassified, I think some people sort of expected, God knows what mysterious things might be found out, but actually nothing came of it. I wouldn't say nothing came of it. One interesting thing that came to be known was that the Indian government, that is the government of Free India, continued to spy on some of my cousins for at least a decade, if not more, to see what they were up to in political terms. So I think that was an interesting issue. But as far as my father's death was concerned, nothing was to be gained from those files.
All right, what are the unanswered questions about Netaji's death as per you? Are there any? Justice Mukherjee Commission had spoken about the destroyed files and discrepancies in his death.
Look here, you have to keep in mind what the times were. The Second World War had just come to an end in that part of the world. The European part had been ended earlier. But Japan capitulated on the 15th of August, and my father, everything was in upheaval at the time. My father was on an airplane to go to Tokyo, and that airplane seems to have been overloaded, and on takeoff in Taipei, it crashed. and as a consequence of that, he died. Now, you did not have a communication system as you have today, where you would have had a number of people with cell phones taking pictures immediately 5 minutes later at that time. It took time for news to get around, and you can be assured that at least the British were most concerned to know whether he did die or not, because for them it was an important issue. And they tried, in fact, to find out by asking the Americans who had occupied Japan what had happened. And those papers, of course, were classified for many years. I don't know when they got declassified. There were other investigations at the time, but they were also not made public. So many of the immediate inquiry efforts were not known to the public. They became known much later. And while they were not available, of course, people contemplated what might have happened. Could it be possible that he escaped once again? After all, he had made some very dangerous and adventurous escapes before. So that was not so surprising that in the beginning we all did not, I was just a child, so I was not concerned with the issue yet. But the adults who were definitely concerned still kept hoping, in part, that he might have survived. Later on, as more evidence was available, I think it should have been amply clear. But once you have all sorts of mysteries and conspiracy stories going around, they will stay on. Just think of President Kennedy's death. You still have all sorts of mysteries. You still have people claiming that they see unidentified flying objects every day. So there's no basis for all these speculations. It's just a speculation. Whereas as far as his death on the 18th of August 1945 has had quite a bit of evidence. Many people, of course, are dead now who were alive and were eyewitnesses to the accident. There were survivors of the plane crash and so on who had been interviewed. There was a doctor who had treated him, of course, has been dead for several years now. So I'm convinced that he died at that time, and that all the other crazy stories that are going around are just crazy stories, partly for money making. I mean, you can have a mysterious story and write a book on it and make a lot of money, much more than if you are a historian and you publish a scientific treaty.
Well, the commission also stated that there was no available document of the air crash. No inquiry was held by a team of British intelligence despite Japanese control, and no attempt was made to look for airport records. Do these findings raise questions on the nature of the crash?
I don't know why Justice Mukherjee signed this report, but if you compare the documents in the annexures, for example, with the statements in the report, they do not tally. And for example, there's one Japanese letter which was translated, and the translation was used in the report, and a relative of ours got suspicious because the translation was relatively short and had it retranslated, and sure enough, part of it had been left out. There were wrong interpretations and God knows what. So the Mukherjee Commission is the one which unfortunately did not work properly, and the report was also not accepted by the government, whereas the other two Indian reports had been.
Ma'am, I'd like to thank you for joining us.